Hi there, my name is Kaitlin, and today I'm going to show you how to create a cool scene from Up. So today I am using a canvas. You can use paper or whatever you have really at your house. I had canvas at my house. I used a rectangular piece of canvas in the portrait type landscape, or the portrait type mode, not in landscape, but in portrait. And I'm going to share with you some of the things that you're going to need, but what you should end up with at the end is a scene from Up with its key phrase, "Adventure is out there." So this is what we are going for. Hopefully you can see that okay. So here's what I used. I used canvas, acrylic paint. You can do this with watercolor, or you could even just use paper and you could draw, or use markers and stuff to color this same picture as well. Whatever you want to do, follow along, have some fun. But I used acrylic paint. You're going to need some blue, at least one blue, with some white that you can mix then to make the gradient. I had 3 that I used. You're going to need some white for the clouds and the writing. You're going to need some sort of colors for the house. I used like a tan and a brown. And then you're going to need some colorful colors for the balloons. So I have a bunch of paint that sits in my craft drawers. So I just pulled out a bunch of it. So paints, canvas, I had a water cup to rinse out my brushes, as well as just some paper towel and stuff to dry off my brushes on. I also had a palette so I could put the paint on it and mix them up. And then you're going to need obviously some paint brushes and utensils. So I suggest at least having 2, one semi-bigger one of any variety really, to do the background. Otherwise with a small brush it takes a long time. And at least one small brush for the writing and like some of the fine details. If you have more, awesome. I used a little fan one to give my clouds some texture, but it's totally up to you. Whatever you've got, you can make it work. And then you're also going to need something to create the little circles for the balloons. Now, I think some of the easiest things to use are either the back of a pen or like an eraser off of a pencil. So you can use whichever you've got on hand. You just have to make sure you clean them in between using them, obviously. So, and then I also laid down a towel. You can lay down a newspaper or anything underneath your art surface as well, so that you don't end up with paint all over the table. So those were the things that I used. I'm hoping that this goes well for you. Be advised that there are points while you're painting this that you will have to leave it to dry for a little bit. We do have several layers on top of each other in certain areas, and I know it's tempting to just want to like push through, but you're going to want to stop, let it dry, and then move forward. If you don't, you're going to end up with a smudgy mess. Take it from experience. I tried to do a pretty good job waiting, but it was very challenging, especially after you do your balloons. Your balloons, you're going to use the most paint. Then you in this whole painting will be in the part of the balloons, and so it takes a while for the balloons to dry. And especially for those of you that are right-handed, you have to put your hand basically right where the balloons are in order to do your writing. So let it dry all the way. Walk away, do something productive, come back, and finish it. Don't be afraid to give it some time to let it dry. You will be far more successful if you let it dry and then come back to it to work on it. So hopefully you enjoy this. Pause the video as you need to complete things, and then you can always come back. And I hope that they turn out well. Have a great time, and without further ado, let's get started. All right, so let's get started. All I have right here right now are just a couple different color blues. We're gonna start with the sky, and we're going for kind of an ombre look. So I just put down 3 different blues that I have and some whites so that I can kind of mix them together. We'll see how it turns out. Not exactly sure. But we're gonna start with dark up top and light down at the bottom. You can paint all the way to the bottom, even though we're gonna put some clouds in because they won't cover up a whole section. And so we wanna make sure that we are covered. So, I mean, just have at it. I'm gonna start with some light at the bottom because I was just mixing it. So it's already on my paintbrush. So, it does not have to be very thick. In fact, if you wanted to, you could thin it out a little bit with a little water. The thinner you do this, the faster it'll all dry as well, which is kind of nice. I'm just going to put some base kind of colors down, and then I'm going to go back through and I'll blend them. But right now I'm just going to kind of do almost like thirds of the canvas here. From like a lighter shade down here on the bottom to a darker shade up top. And again, it does not have to be pretty at this point. You can go through and finesse it kind of after we've gotten some of the more of the paint on. So again, I'm just going for an ombre look of light to dark as we go upward. The last color I have is really kind of a strong blue color, so I will probably have to mix this with some white just so that it's not such a drastic change in color, or blend some of it into the other blues that are on this so that it's not as crazy of a transition, because as you can tell from these two, it's kind of like a gradual, and then that blue up top is kind of strong. So again, I'll probably go through and mix it, maybe mix some of my other colors with it so that it all kind of takes on at least a hue of this darker blue. And again, just at this point trying to cover it. You can use a bigger brush than this one if you want. I kind of picked something that was kind of in the middle just because I like to have a little bit more control than you have over some of the big brushes. But obviously if you do this with a littler brush, it will take you ages. So as you can kind of tell, I'm just kind of blending it down into this other blue that I have here. So you can kind of see the gradient as it's transitioning, so then it's not quite that crazy drastic transition to that blue up top. And I'll come in and I'll grab a little bit more of my blue from this middle section and kind of transition it down into this bottom section. We'll grab a little bit of the bottom, cover up a few of the spots that I didn't quite hit so well. And it's okay for some of these dark hues. As you can tell, some of the dark kind of has crept its way down here. That's fine, because obviously the sky kind of has all different shades throughout it, and so I'm not that worried, and it kind of gives it a little bit of character, which is fun. So I'm going to finish up kind of gradienting this, and then I will check back with you before the next step. Alright, so we're back. Basically all I did while we were gone was I made sure that I was satisfied with the gradient of it. I kind of painted over the edges a little bit because I think it makes it kind of look nice because it transitions to the sides as opposed to having the abrupt white sides and or just drippage from your painting. And I made sure it dried. So there's a few spots up here that look a little damp still, but we're gonna start down on the bottom, so we should be good. So next thing we're gonna add in here are the clouds. Now what we're gonna do is they're gonna kind of frame the lower half of this, or the bottom third, I should say, of your canvas. So roughly, I'm gonna try and, you know, just add some floaty kind of clouds, some happy little clouds, down here on the bottom. I'm gonna paint in kind of a more solid edge to start, and then I'm gonna kind of hopefully fade that out and kind of make it look a little more puffy and cloud-like. So I just have some white. Now, if you're using acrylic paint, it should go on right over. You may have to do a coat or two of it, but it shouldn't be hard, especially over the lighter blue color. It shouldn't be hard to cover. If you're doing something like watercolors, then you're gonna not want to paint this bottom part. Probably should have told you that before, but because watercolors don't color over very well. So let's see here. Let's just add in some like little, and again, they're gonna look kind of solid and stuff right now, but then I'm gonna kind of hopefully fluff them up a little bit and make it look good. Right now I'm just kind of trying to rough in, I don't know what I want. And again, I'm just kind of trying to frame the bottom of the canvas here with clouds. You know, you're just supposed to make it look like you're in the sky. So I think that's kind of the outline that I'm going to go with. It's intentionally a little uneven in places. I might make it a little bit more so. Then you're just going to start filling this in. So before I start to add much texture to it, I'm just going to do the basics of getting some paint in these areas, and then I'm going to kind of fill them out again. Now again, you don't want this to be too thick. You want it to be thick enough obviously to cover your base coat here, but I almost suggest doing 2 thinner layers, as it will dry much quicker than if you just kind of dump on the paint. If you've got loads of time that you're looking to waste, or I mean sit around doing whatever it is you want to do, then you can go ahead and do 1 thicker layer. I will probably do some thinner layers just so that it dries quicker and I don't have as much wait time, because I want to, you know, be able to complete this in a decent amount of time. So again, just filling in. And again, this is just kind of filling in, and then I will add some, hopefully a little bit of dimension to it, and puff in just a second. Some texture. Because like I said, right now I'm just looking at filling in these spots, because I just want it to be clouds down here. And again, I'm sure that there are many of you out there that are better artists than I am. And you can show me how it's done. I'd love to see your paintings when you're done with them. So as you can see, I've got like a basic cover. Some of the areas are already starting to dry. I have a cup of water over here on the side too that I'm just using to clean brushes in between. So, and some paper to dry. So now I'm going to take a little like fan brush that I have and try and add in a little bit of texture so that the clouds don't look so kind of meticulous and planned out. And I have no idea how well this is going to work, but I'm just going to kind of go in some swoopy motions so that it just looks a little bit more cloud-like, I guess, is what we're going for. And I actually don't mind if it's a little like scraped through at points. So I don't think it has to be completely covered at all your points, because clouds often aren't just a solid color, you know what I mean? So you might even choose to add back in some color to your clouds after you're done with this, but you know, and you do some things and you're like, not a big fan of that, and you just kind of go with it and you make it work. like whatever just happened over there. It was kind of odd, but we're just gonna make it work. So again, I don't want my clouds to look perfect because clouds aren't perfect, but just adding a little bit of texture, and as you can see, like a little bit of like that kind of like space that you can kind of see through, because clouds are a little bit more wispy and stuff than just plain old solid lines. So that's kind of what I'm going for, is I'm just trying to fluff up my clouds a little bit. Give them a little bit of dimension. So as you can see, I've kind of just fluffed them up a little bit. And you're just going to do that until you're satisfied with what you've got there. I'm getting pretty close, so I'm just going to finish kind of fluffing up my clouds, and then I'm going to let that dry so that we can then start with the house and the balloons. So give me a few, I'm going to let it dry, you let yours dry, and we'll be back. Alright, so the clouds have dried, so we're looking good to move on to the next step. So what the next step is going to be is we're going to draw in the house and the balloons. And then we'll let that dry before we move on to the writing. So I'm planning on having the writing over here, which means that I want to situate the house probably about here, so there's lots of room for the balloons to kind of come up above that. And then there's still room over on the left side here to write the words. So I just grabbed a number of different colored paints, if you can see that. So I grabbed like a tan and a brown for the house, and some white for the strings of the balloons, as well as just a variety of colors that I had for the actual balloons themselves. These can be any colors for you. It does not have to be anything in particular. These are just the colors that I have that I'll be using. So, the easiest way I would say to start the house is to pick whatever lighter color you're using, and just to make a rectangle, because the base of what we're going to be drawing here is a rectangle. So I'm just going to kind of figure out, I'm thinking like right in here probably is where I want to locate this little house. So I'm just going to start by making kind of a little rectangle, and this is going to serve as the basis for what this house is going to be. The nice thing is that this house is pretty much a rectangular shape, so we don't have to really worry about too many things. Now, I am going to be honest, we are not doing the full-on house from up. That's a very colorful and much more detailed house. I figured we'd keep it simple and go with a different example that I had seen, which is a little bit more neutral and simple. So yeah, you're gonna make a little rectangle. I'm making mine a little bit bigger. I want it to keep a rectangular proportion, but I'm also trying to think of like, okay, the roof is gonna be on here along with the front door, and all of that will all fit onto this rectangle. So you may have to do a couple layers depending on what color you have as the base of your house. You are also welcome to do the full fun colored house from up. Like I said, I'm just doing a simpler version. So once you have your little rectangle, and again, I might have to wait a second for this to dry, but we're going to put in the roof line, and then as well as some kind of detailing for the house. So to kind of create some shape and whatnot, I'm going to go in and add kind of like a goldish color right now, just to kind of define the different parts of the house. And I don't know that I'm really going to like this gold color on there, and I may change it, to be completely honest, but we're going to try it. So I'm going to use a smaller paintbrush, and I'm just going to kind of trace in the little parts that I want. So it's going to come in a little bit, right about here probably. It's it's gonna come in, and then I'm gonna go up to a point. Right, and then it's gonna come across the rest of the way. And you can make that a little bit more center if you want. Truthfully, I might make it a little bit more center, so I might take just a little bit of this cloth here and decide that I want that a little bit more center, and that's okay. So all I'm doing there is kind of wiping that off, and it's pretty easy to fix. I'm just going to put a little bit more tan in the middle here. Ooh, make sure that your paintbrush is dry. Otherwise, like I just did, you're going to have a little bit more water on there than you want. So a little bit more tan. I decided that I want kind of the arch where the doorway and stuff is going to go to be a little bit more centered. Not all the way necessarily centered, but closer to center than where I had it. So I'm going to make this line come in a little bit further, and then we'll do our peak. And again, because I just put some of this color on, it may need a second to dry. So fans blowing on it can all speed up this process a little bit. I'm going to try and just get some of the base colors blocked out on here so that you can see where everything goes, and then I will probably go through and take the time to let it dry a little bit better. So the other thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to go through and put like a little line down here near the bottom. And again, this can be with any color. It doesn't have to be this gold. I'm just trying to pick something that is going to kind of blend in with it and not stick out too much. This is going to come down to create a shape for the house. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in with the brown, with the darker brown here, and that's going to become the roof. So you're just going to paint over the tan that you did up here. Now, if you're thinking further ahead and you want to, you can always just paint this part straight brown. It might help though to have that color underneath, just because then it's easier to cover up the color underneath. Easier to cover up that blue because the blue is definitely a bit dark. But I'm going to go right up to where my yellow lines were. And again, if you have to fix this, you know, after letting it dry for a second and then fix it, that's totally cool. And I will probably do that myself. So a roof, and I'm going to put a little chimney on my house as well. I'm going to put it right about here. Because that's where the balloons are going to attach. So that way I have a little space for them to attach. And I'm going to add in like a little door type thing as well. Mix my tan with my yellow a little bit and kind of create a little shade there that's going to be different but not too crazy. And you can do this with the brown too. I might actually mix a little bit of the brown with the tan and create kind of a better color for that. Not as dark as the roof, but a little bit darker so that you can see where the door is. And then maybe put like a little bush out front. Now, yes, I know that the bush wouldn't probably go up with it, but it adds to the whimsical. So I'm going to put a little bush down here. Alright, I'm going to let this dry a second, and then I will show you what it looks like a little touched up and dried. Okay, so the house is mostly dry now. I put a little bit more paint on just to cover up some of the blue from underneath. So now we're going to move on to the balloons. Now, there's a lot of balloons, obviously, that have to lift this house. So it is going to take up a good chunk of area. So what I'm thinking is we'll probably have like the strings, probably do about here is where we'll start the balloons. And the balloons are going to take up, you know, a solid amount of space here. We'll still leave us room over here for the writing. but we want a nice big cloud of balloons here. Now, all I did was put a bunch of different colors of paint on my little easel here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to test a couple different things and see what works better. I grabbed an eraser that I can tap in the paint and then use as balloons, or you could use the back of a pen, would also work. Otherwise, the back of one of your paintbrushes might work. I'm just going to try a couple different things to see what works best as far as size-wise for the balloons. I'm thinking it's going to be the pen, the back of the pen, or the pencil eraser. Obviously, you're going to have to clean it off in between. What I'm planning on doing is doing quite a few of each of the colors, and then kind of filling it in as you go, because some of them are obviously going to be back further, so this part is going to take a little bit of time. Might do a little time lapse, we'll see. Just to kind of fill out this balloon section. So I'm thinking, yeah, it looks about good. So we're going to try a couple different things. So I think the first one that I'm going to try is probably the pen back, just because I feel like this is going to be the easiest thing to clean in between. Now, I'm actually going to test it on my little piece of paper towel that I was using for cleaning my brushes, and I'm just going to, okay, so that's not a bad size. You'll probably have to redip it frequently, but it's a good circle shape, and like I said, pretty easy to clean, which is nice. Otherwise, we can try the eraser too and see what kind of color coverage we get with that. That's probably a clearer circle, and it's a little bit smaller. Ooh, I think I might like the eraser better. So I might use the eraser. Obviously, you're gonna have to clean the eraser before you change colors, but I think that might be overall the better shape and size for the balloons. The pen was a little bit bigger, so I'm gonna have at it. I'm gonna pick a color. I'm just going to start placing some balloons down here, and I kind of want to eventually, obviously, create a circular kind of grouping, but I'm going to try and spread out my purples. I figure I'll have to probably go through and do like two coats of each of the colors, or two go-throughs with each of the colors, just because some of them will get a little bit more buried, the ones that are done earlier as opposed to later, and I want you to be able to see lots of different colors, so I will probably go through a couple times with the colors. And eventually, obviously, this will get a lot more crowded. It does not matter where you put them. We're just going to fill it in. So again, you're putting a lot of paint on this part. And again, I've been through all the colors that I'm going to put on here, I think once now. This was my last color, so I might let this dry and then do another set of balloons on and around it again so that it doesn't get muddy, because that's the one thing I don't want, is I know that there's a lot of paint here, but I want it to still look clean and not muddy. And so I might give it a few minutes, let it dry and come back to it. But I think it's starting to come together. So next time I check in with you, I will have let this dry. There's a lot of paint on here, so you really are going to want to let this dry a bit. But I'm going to let this dry, maybe add on a few others as far as the balloons go, and we'll come back and we'll put in the strings that go into it as well then too. Alright, see you soon. Alright, as you can see, I have kind of filled out my balloons a little bit more. I mean, your biggest goal is to just try and make sure that there isn't too much sky that you can see through there. I tried to get a good mixture of colors and good composition, but I mean, it's really up to you. You just put a bunch of dots down, basically. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to add in the strings to attach the house to the balloons. Now, we're not going to put strings everywhere, obviously. You're not going to put a string up to each and every balloon in here, because one, that would look ridiculous, and two, it would take forever. So what we're going to do is we're just going to create kind of a cluster of strings down here at the bottom. We're just going to kind of draw a few of them up. So some of them will go up a little bit into there, some of them not too much. Now I'm going to have to be careful because there's still quite a bit of wet paint. Some of these areas are a little bit more dry, and some of them are very wet because, as you know now, when you're putting on that paint and you're dotting it on, it's a bit more paint than like when we were working out here. So I'm going to start, and depending on how it goes, I may shut off the camera and show you again when it's dry, but we'll see. So I've got another thin brush, because again, these lines are kind of dainty. And then I'm just going to start from my chimney, and I'm just going to kind of put them up in here. And you may have to clean off your brush quite a bit, because like I said, as you go up into the balloons, like mine are just still very wet. So I'm going to start with a couple main strands off the bottom here, and they're just going to go up into here. By the end, you should have quite a few coming out of your chimney. Not that you'll be able to see them all very distinctly, but you do want to look like you've got quite a few coming up into your bunch, because you do have obviously a lot of balloons to hold. So I'm going to shut off the camera. When I come back, we will start the lettering. So let your stuff dry, get your strings on there, and we'll be back for the lettering. All right. I'm not gonna lie, that took some time. The balloons are finally dry. I did look like a fool trying to wave around the house to get it to dry faster. But hopefully you did something productive during that time, because otherwise you were just sitting around watching paint dry. So the balloons are dry, my strings are in there, and now we're gonna move on to the writing. Now, little trick for the writing is I always try to go in and pencil it out kind of where it's going to be. So I didn't do the whole thing, but I did write the adventure part, because that part's in cursive and it's bigger, and I want to make sure that it doesn't end up in my balloons, although it's not the end of the world if you end up writing over part of your balloons either. But I wanted to make sure spacing wise and that I had it like on a straight line and stuff like that. So I do have that kind of penciled in. I don't know that you can really see it, but it is kind of penciled right here, the adventure part. So I'm going to go ahead and try and take like my smallest paintbrush, whatever you've got the most dexterity with. Now, you can do this a number of different ways if you want. You can use a Sharpie, especially if you got, or a white paint marker, if you've got one of those. That would probably be about 10 times easier than painting it on here, which I'm going to attempt to do. I've never been a big fan of having to write on canvas with paint, just because it's rather time intensive and can be very challenging. It's also challenging because, you know, when you go to move somewhere else to write, you want to make sure that you're not bumping it and smudging it. Because once you get to this point, it's a little harder to correct mistakes. Now, granted, I can wipe this clean and I can redo some blue sky if I have to. But we're going to try our best to get this in here and to do it as pretty as possible. Again, I'm not a big fan of my handwriting and or my cursive, so we're going to do the best we can. So if you're painting it on here, you're going to need some white paint and the smallest brush you can get with the most control, whatever that's going to look like. And I am going to tip my canvas sideways here. I hope you can still see it, but in order to be able to write better, I'm going to, tip my canvas so that I can reach it better. Make sure that you don't have any paint on your hands before you go do that, or you smudge it everywhere. So the key with writing or lettering in paint, especially when it's kind of fine and detailed, is to make sure that you don't have too much paint on your paintbrush. It is also a lot easier to come in and down as opposed to up. So you may have to turn your canvas to whichever direction is going to be easiest for you to do this. So you may see me turning my canvas at points so that I can have better control. I'm hoping that I stay in frame for you, but like I said, it'll just depend on what I have to do here. Again, like I said, it's easier to come down, so I started the loop and ended that like here, and then I went up to the top so that I can have that control of coming down. Again, I'm trying to make sure that every part of this is dry so that I'm not smudging anything. I apologize if my head gets in the way here too. I get a lot closer to things when I'm doing lettering, as it is a little bit more challenging, and I feel like I need to get close in order to be able to do it well. So, like I said, there is a good chance that you'll have to go in and do another coat as well. But just do the best you can. Again, it's not like we're trying to impress anybody. Like, I made this line a little thicker than I want to, so I'm trying to clean that up a little bit. You can always clean that up later with the blue paint if you need to too. So don't freak out too bad about it. If you mess something up, just try and keep your paintbrush moving. I know, easier said than done, but when you start letters and stuff, if you can keep your paintbrush moving, you're in better shape, because then it's one smooth line as opposed to starting and stopping, because then you get the jagged line. So again, this is cursive. You can do this in whatever font you would like. I should specify, it does not have to be in cursive, but the inspiration picture that I have, this part was in cursive, so that is what I'm doing. Although, it would have been easier to not do it in cursive. So if you find yourself not wanting to do it in cursive, or maybe your teachers didn't make you learn cursive like mine made me, then you can always do this in print. Ooh, see, like that ended up being a little bit of ball because it was not a continuous line, but again, it's something I can clean up later. And again, the more you can keep it in one fluid movement, the better off you're gonna be here. Also, if you can keep your paintbrush without getting too much paint on it. My T there had a little bit more paint on that downstroke, that's why it's a little thicker. So again, depending on what you want, just be conscious of that. I'm trying not to put a lot of paint on here. Make sure you spell everything correctly too. That would be kind of nightmarish if you worked so hard and then you spelled this wrong. So A-D-V-E-N-T-U-R-E, adventure. Yeah, that's how it's spelled. Can you imagine we get this far and you discover that you spelled it wrong? Ooh, that would be my luck. I would be the one who, you know, was like, oh my gosh, we're finally done. And then I discovered that I'd spelled one of the words wrong. And then I had to completely paint over the words and redo it. Yeah, that would be my luck. I did that once with a project that I was doing for somebody's wedding. And I wrote the wrong date on it. And I had to completely redo that part because the date that I wrote was not their wedding date. I think I had like, I don't know, the month wrong or something. I had like the right day of the week and the year or something, but I just blanked and thought that one month was whatever number it was because I think I was just writing out the numbers. And I just had it wrong. All right, so that's the adventure part. The is out there on my example is in just regular writing. It is rather small on there, so I may make it a little bit bigger. I might go is out here instead of they had it underneath here. But again, it's your own thing. Do what you want to do. So if you want to have it underneath, go for it. I think that I'm going to spread it out a little bit so that it's across the way here so that I have a little bit more space to work with. I did not pencil out this part. I will say that. So hopefully, spacing wise, it ends up looking okay. But I'm just going to, yeah, you know what? I'm going to show you a little trick. So something that I sometimes do is I'll take a piece of paper or something and lay it across my canvas, making sure that it's lined up on the one side. And because my paint is dry, it doesn't matter that I'm over this. And that way you can see if you're straight. So what I'm going to do here is I am going to actually pencil in here the is out here. Because knowing me, my words will end up on some crazy slope. So believe it or not, this part is straight, even though it doesn't necessarily look like it. But I'm going to write my is out there, over here, underneath here, so that one, I make sure that spacing wise, I'm okay. And two, to make sure that I stay on a good line. So it's for spacing, but also for a line, because I have the tendency, especially because I write on things on an angle, if I don't have lines, my writing ends up on an angle. So now that I've got that kind of mocked in, I know where I'm painting, which is always helpful. So again, this is smaller, so I'm going to try and do my best to keep it clean, but sometimes there's only so much you can do. Like my paintbrush did not want to hold the paint very well on that one. There's my is. I'm hoping that I'm still in frame and you can see this. And I'm not gonna lie, it is not perfectly on my outline. And that's okay. If you can see any of the pencil marks later, you can always go back and erase it after everything is dry. And I say that because I tend to write a little bit bigger sometimes, or the spacing ends up being a little bit different when I actually paint it as opposed to write it with a pencil. But that being said, if that's the case for you, you can go back and erase the pencil after everything is dry. I gotta say, like E's and S's are some of the toughest to do when painting because of the curves. Like my two E's look very different there. There you go. Adventure is out there. I debated doing something a little funny with it. And I think I'm going to, just because I'm painting this and it's time period. So you know what? I am going to do it. And I'm going to pause you a second and I'm going to bring you back when it's done because I think it'll be a fun little reveal. So when we come back, hopefully this thing looks done. So, BRB. All right, so here is my final product. I think it turned out pretty well. I'm really happy with the texture in the clouds, and I think the writing turned out pretty good at least. So hopefully you had fun painting along with me, and I hope your paintings turned out well. I would love to see them, so feel free to share your drawings and your paintings. But yeah, I hope this was a way for you to have some fun in this quarantine and that you were able to create a little art.